This is the story of David Morrison and his wife, Vanessa, a tale of betrayal, quiet strength, and the surprising discovery of what we're truly capable of when everything falls apart. David Morrison had always been the kind of man who built things. Not just buildings, though as a structural engineer, he designed plenty of those, but lives, careers, dreams. He built them with patience, with precision, with the kind of quiet dedication that goes unnoticed until it's gone. He met Vanessa Hartley at a community art exhibition 12 years ago. She was selling watercolor paintings from a folding table in the corner. Her work brilliant but unrecognized, her confidence fragile as paper. David bought 3 paintings that day, not because he particularly understood art, but because something in her eyes looked hungry, not for money, but for someone to believe in what she saw. "You have real talent," he told her, and he meant it. They married within a year. Vanessa moved into David's modest but comfortable home, and he began the careful work of building her up. He paid for her to attend workshops with established artists. He converted the spare bedroom into a proper studio with north-facing windows and professional lighting. He handled the business side of her art, creating a website, managing her social media, negotiating with galleries, keeping meticulous records of expenses and sales. "I'm not good at that stuff," Vanessa would say, waving her paint-stained hands. "You're so much better with numbers and people." David didn't mind. He found satisfaction in watching her blossom. Within 5 years, Vanessa had pieces in 3 respected galleries. Within 8, she was being featured in regional art magazines. By their 10th anniversary, she was commanding 4-figure prices for her paintings, traveling to exhibitions, networking with collectors and critics. David managed it all from behind the scenes, booking her travel, preparing her portfolio materials, even coaching her on what to say during interviews. He took fewer projects at his engineering firm to accommodate her schedule. When she needed to travel for a showing, he went along, carrying her canvases, setting up her displays, then disappearing into the background while she charmed potential buyers. "I couldn't do any of this without you," she told him after a particularly successful exhibition in Seattle. They were in their hotel room, and she was flushed with wine and praise. David remembered feeling proud, useful, necessary. He should have paid more attention to that last word. The distance crept in gradually, like water damage behind a wall invisible, until the structure fails. Vanessa started taking trips alone, saying she needed to connect with the art community without distractions. She became protective of her phone, angling it away when texts arrived. She grew irritable when David asked about her day, accusing him of being controlling, of not understanding the creative process. "You're an engineer," she said during one argument. "Everything is blueprints and calculations for you. Art doesn't work that way. I need space to feel, to experience, to be inspired." David gave her space. He gave her everything she asked for, really. He always had. The truth arrived on a Tuesday afternoon in March. David had come home early from a site inspection because of equipment delays. He pulled into the driveway of their house, the house he'd bought before they met, the house he'd renovated to include her studio, and noticed an unfamiliar silver sedan parked across the street. He thought nothing of it as he unlocked the front door. The house was quiet. Too quiet for 2:30 in the afternoon. Vanessa's car was in the garage, so she was home, probably painting with headphones in. David climbed the stairs, intending to change out of his work boots. The bedroom door was slightly ajar. He pushed it open. The scene before him didn't process immediately. His brain, trained for structural analysis and problem solving, rejected the data at first. Vanessa, a man David didn't recognize. The bed David slept in every night. The man scrambled for his clothes. Vanessa pulled the sheet around herself, her face cycling through shock, fear, and something else David couldn't quite identify. Not shame. Not exactly. "David," she started. He held up his hand. He didn't want to hear it. Not yet. Not while his heart was trying to break through his ribs. He turned and walked downstairs, his movements mechanical, automated. He could hear them arguing in urgent whispers above him. Hear the man's footsteps hurrying down and out the front door. The silver sedan starting and pulling away. David stood in his living room, surrounded by Vanessa's paintings on the walls, Vanessa's sculptures on the shelves, Vanessa's career that he'd built with his own hands, and felt something crack open inside his chest. Vanessa appeared at the top of the stairs, now wearing a robe, her expression already shifting toward defense. "We need to talk," she said. David looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time in their 12 years together, he saw clearly what he built, not a partnership, but a monument to someone else's ambition. A beautiful, hollow thing. "No," he said quietly, "we really don't." He walked to the hall closet and pulled out his suitcase. The suitcase was old, a scuffed navy blue hard shell David had owned since college. He'd used it for site visits to remote locations, for the occasional conference, for their honeymoon in Portland 12 years ago. Now he carried it upstairs, past Vanessa, who stood frozen on the landing, and into their bedroom. "What are you doing?" Her voice had an edge to it now, something sharp beneath the uncertainty. David didn't answer. He opened his dresser drawers, methodically removing clothes and placing them in the suitcase. Underwear, socks, t-shirts, work pants. He moved with the careful precision he brought to everything, each action deliberate and measured. "David, stop. Just stop and talk to me." Vanessa moved closer, her hand reaching for his arm. He stepped aside, not roughly, but definitively. He went to the closet and took out 3 dress shirts, his spare work boots, his toiletry bag from the bathroom. "You're being ridiculous," Vanessa said. "People make mistakes. We can work through this. Don't throw away everything we've built over one what?" David's voice was calm, almost conversational, which seemed to unsettle her more than anger would have. "One afternoon? One affair? How long, Vanessa?" She didn't answer immediately, which was answer enough. "It doesn't matter," she said finally. "What matters is us, our marriage, everything we've created together." David continued packing. He added his laptop, his chargers, important documents from the filing cabinet in the spare room, birth certificate, passport, tax records. Things he'd organized and maintained because Vanessa found paperwork tedious. "His name is Preston," Vanessa said suddenly, her voice taking on a different quality. "Preston Caldwell. He's a curator at the Riverside Gallery. He understands my work in a way that—" She stopped herself, but the damage was done. "In a way I don't," David finished for her. He zipped the suitcase closed and lifted it off the bed. That's when something in Vanessa shifted. The pleading expression hardened into something else, something that had maybe always been there beneath the surface, waiting. "Fine," she said, her voice cold now. "Walk away. Run like you always do when things get difficult." David paused at the doorway. "When have I ever run from difficulty in our marriage? You run from emotion, from real connection. You think managing my career is the same as loving me, but it's not. Preston sees me. He feels things with me. You just arrange things." David absorbed this, nodded slowly. "You're probably right. I'm not good at the things Preston is good at. But tell me, Vanessa, does Preston know how to file quarterly tax estimates for self-employment income? Does he know which galleries take 40% commission versus 50? Does he know that you need your studio at 68 degrees exactly, or you can't work, or that you're allergic to manganese blue pigments, or that your confidence falls apart before every exhibition and someone needs to talk you through it for hours?" Vanessa's face flushed. "That's not the same. You're right, it's not." David picked up his suitcase. "Preston gets the exciting parts, the gallery openings and the wine and the inspiration. I got everything else. I got the work." He started down the stairs. Vanessa followed, her robe trailing behind her. "You need me," she called after him. "You don't know how to be alone. You've built your entire life around taking care of me. What are you going to do without me to focus on? You'll fall apart." David reached the front door and turned to look at her one last time. She stood on the 3rd step, backlit by the afternoon sun streaming through the upstairs window, looking almost like one of her own paintings. Dramatic, beautiful, and somehow unreal. "You'll never survive without me." The words came out sharp and desperate, loud enough that David wondered if the neighbors heard. He studied her face, searching for the woman he'd met at that art exhibition 12 years ago. She was gone, as she'd ever really existed. Or maybe she'd been there all along, and he'd simply built a different image in his mind, the way he built everything else carefully, precisely and completely wrong. "Goodbye, Vanessa," he said quietly, and walked out the door. He drove to extended stay hotel near his office, checked in for a week, and sat on the edge of the bed in the sterile room. His phone buzzed constantly, texts from Vanessa alternating between apologies and accusations. He turned it off. The silence was overwhelming. David had built his life around Vanessa's needs, her schedule, her dreams. For 12 years, his decisions had been filtered through a single question: what does Vanessa need? Now, sitting alone in a hotel room with nothing but a suitcase and a failed marriage, he confronted a terrifying blank space. What did David need? He didn't know. He'd forgotten how to ask. That night, he lay awake staring at the ceiling, and for the first time since he'd found Vanessa in their bed with another man, he felt something other than numbness. It started as a tightness in his chest, then rose into his throat, and finally broke free as tears he couldn't control and didn't try to stop. He cried for the marriage he thought he'd had. He cried for the years spent building someone else's dream, while his own gathered dust. He cried for the version of himself who'd believed that sacrifice and dedication were the same as love. When the tears finally stopped, something else remained, a small, stubborn ember of anger. Not rage. David wasn't built for rage, but something quieter and more sustainable. A refusal. He would not fall apart. He would not prove Vanessa right. He picked up his phone, turned it back on, and sent a single text to his lawyer, Robert Yates, someone he knew through professional circles. "I need to discuss a divorce. Are you available this week?" The reply came within minutes. "Thursday at 9. I'll make time." David set the phone down and took his first full breath in hours. The foundation had cracked, the structure had failed, but he was still standing. Now he'd have to learn how to build something new. Robert Yates had the kind of face that inspired confidence, weathered, intelligent, with eyes that missed nothing. He'd been practicing family law for 23 years, and he listened to David's story without interruption, taking occasional notes in precise handwriting. "Let me make sure I understand," Robert said when David finished. "You purchased the house before the marriage. Your name is solely on the deed and mortgage." "Correct." "Correct. The studio renovation, you paid for that out of your income?" "Yes, everything. The materials, the contractor, the equipment. And Vanessa's business, the website, the gallery contacts, the financial management, you handled all of that?" David nodded. "She focused on the art. I handled everything else." Robert leaned back in his chair. "Do you have documentation, receipts, contracts, correspondence with galleries?" "Everything. I kept detailed records." "Of course you did." Robert's mouth quirked in something almost like a smile. "David, I'm going to be honest with you. Your wife has built a successful career during your marriage, which typically means her income and assets would be considered marital property. However, the fact that you can demonstrate you were essentially functioning as her unpaid manager, agent, and financial advisor changes things considerably." Over the following weeks, David learned just how much it changed things. Vanessa wanted the house. She wanted half of David's retirement accounts and savings. She wanted spousal support, claiming she'd sacrificed her own financial independence by relying on David's management of her career. "She's taking the position that you controlled her business and she's entitled to compensation," Robert explained during one meeting. "Her lawyer is arguing financial abuse." David felt that quiet anger kindle again. Financial abuse. It's a strategy. Not a particularly good one, given your documentation, but a strategy nonetheless. The documentation told a different story. David had kept everything. Every invoice he'd paid for her supplies. Every contract he negotiated with galleries, always ensuring Vanessa retained rights to her work and received fair compensation. Every spreadsheet tracking her income and expenses. Email threads showing how he'd coached her through pricing decisions, always advocating for her to charge more, not less. Most damning were the bank records. Vanessa's art income had been deposited into their joint account. Yes, but David could show that he'd never touched it except to pay business expenses or transfer it to her personal account at her request. His engineering income had paid for their mortgage, utilities, groceries, insurance, everything. Your wife has been operating as a sole proprietor under her own name, Robert said. You have no legal ownership of her business or her artwork, but you also have clear evidence that you invested tens of thousands of dollars into building her career with no expectation of return ownership. That's going to matter. The divorce proceedings dragged through summer and into fall. Vanessa fought for everything, her lawyer painting David as controlling and calculating. But the evidence was overwhelming, and eventually reality set in. The house was David's separate property, purchased before marriage. Vanessa would have to move out. Her art business was her own, but so were all the responsibilities David had shouldered. The gallery contracts were in her name, but David had been the one maintaining those relationships, and several galleries quietly let it be known they preferred working with him. Most importantly, the financial analysis showed that while Vanessa had earned increasingly good money from her art, she'd spent it just as fast expensive dinners, designer clothes, trips that David hadn't accompanied her on. Trips, it turned out, that often involved Preston Caldwell. David's finances, meanwhile, were solid. He had savings, investments, a stable income. He'd been building financial security while Vanessa had been building an image. The settlement was finalized in November. Vanessa got her business and artwork. David kept the house, his retirement accounts intact, and paid no spousal support. The judge noted that both parties had maintained their own careers and earning potential throughout the marriage. Outside the courthouse, Vanessa looked smaller somehow, diminished. Preston wasn't with her, according to Robert's investigators. He'd quietly ended things once Vanessa's financial situation became clear. You did this on purpose, Vanessa said, her voice bitter. You made me dependent on you and then pulled the rug out. David looked at her. This woman he'd loved, this woman he'd built up with his own hands, and felt nothing but tired sadness. I taught you to fly, he said quietly. You'll have to learn to navigate on your own now. You're talented enough. You always were. He walked away, and this time, she didn't call after him. David threw himself into work with renewed focus. Without Vanessa's schedule to manage, he had time-based stretches of it. He took on a major project, designing a mixed-use development downtown. He started running in the mornings, something he hadn't done since college. He cooked actual meals instead of grabbing takeout between managing Vanessa's calendar. He was lonely. He wouldn't pretend otherwise. The house felt too big, too quiet. Some mornings he woke up and automatically checked his phone for Vanessa's schedule before remembering there wasn't one anymore. But beneath the loneliness, something else was growing. Space. Possibility. The freedom to ask himself what he actually wanted, not what someone else needed him to provide. One Saturday in December, David found himself at the same community center where he'd met Vanessa all those years ago. They were having another art exhibition. He walked through slowly, looking at paintings and sculptures, and realized he could finally see them as what they were not, as projects to manage or investments to develop, but simply as art. Some pieces moved him, others didn't. And that was okay. Near the exit, he noticed a bulletin board covered with flyers. Music lessons, yoga classes, a woodworking workshop starting in January. David paused at that last one. He'd always been good with his hands, good at building things, but he'd only ever built for other people's structures for clients, a career for Vanessa, a life for everyone but himself. He took out his phone and photographed the flyer. Maybe it was time to build something just for himself. Something small and purposeful, with no goal except the satisfaction of creation. Maybe it was time to remember what his own hands could do. Winter settled over the city with unusual gentleness, bringing crisp air and clear skies instead of the typical gray drizzle. David started the woodworking class in January, joining 8 other students in a warehouse studio that smelled of sawdust and mineral oil. The instructor, a retired carpenter named Vincent Harper, had the patient demeanor of someone who'd spent decades teaching people the difference between knowing something and understanding it. Woodworking is about respect, Vincent said during the first session, running his weathered hand along a plank of walnut. respect for the material, for the tools, and for the process. You can't force wood to do what you want. You have to work with what it wants to become. David found the work meditative. Unlike engineering, where precision meant calculations and specifications, woodworking demanded a different kind of attention. You had to feel the grain, listen to how the saw bit into the wood, adjust to imperfections rather than fighting them. His first project was a simple box dovetail joints, sanded smooth, finished with tung oil. It took him 3 weeks and was slightly lopsided. He kept it on his desk at home, a reminder that starting over meant accepting imperfection. Work at the engineering firm was going well. The downtown development project had evolved into something David was genuinely proud of. A design that balanced commercial viability with community space, incorporating green elements and accessible public areas. His boss, Patricia Donovan, noticed the renewed energy. "Whatever you're doing differently, keep doing it," she told him in March. "The clients love you, and your designs have more life to them lately." David thought about that. More life. Maybe that's what happened when you stopped giving all your energy away and kept some for yourself. He started accepting social invitations he would have declined before drinks with colleagues, a hiking trip with his college roommate, a neighborhood potluck. He wasn't looking for replacement connections, wasn't trying to fill a Vanessa-shaped hole in his life. He was simply present, showing up for his own life in a way he hadn't in years. Through the woodworking class, he met Nicole Brennan, a high school chemistry teacher who was building a bookshelf for her classroom. She was quick to laugh, terrible at measuring twice, and completely unintimidated by power tools. "I figure if I can handle teenagers and sulfuric acid, I can handle a table saw," she said cheerfully, right before nearly cutting her template crooked. David helped her set up the angle correctly, and she bought him coffee afterward as thanks. They talked about teaching and engineering, about the satisfaction of building things, about her students and his projects. It was easy, uncomplicated. David found himself looking forward to Tuesday evenings, not just for the woodworking, but for the conversation afterward. "You want to grab dinner sometime?" Nicole asked in April, direct and straightforward. "Like a real dinner, not just coffee after class." "I'd like that," David said, and meant it. They went to a small Italian restaurant downtown. Nicole talked about her passion for making chemistry accessible to students who'd been told science wasn't for them. David talked about sustainable design and how buildings could serve communities rather than just investors. They discovered they both loved old movies, both hated surprise parties, both preferred hiking to beaches. "Can I ask you something?" Nicole said over tiramisu. "You seem like someone who's recently figured something important out. Am I reading that right?" David considered this. "I spent a long time building things for someone else and calling it love. I'm learning to build for myself now." "That's honest," Nicole smiled. "I appreciate honest." They started seeing each other regularly, but David was careful not to fall into old patterns. He didn't cancel his woodworking class when Nicole had a free evening. He didn't automatically defer to her preferences. He checked in with himself first. What do I want? What do I need? Sometimes what he needed was solitude, sometimes it was company, sometimes it was the satisfaction of sanding a piece of maple until it felt like silk, or the challenge of a complex joint, or the simple pleasure of cooking dinner in his own kitchen. Meanwhile, through professional circles, David heard about Vanessa. The news wasn't good. Without David managing her business relationships, several galleries had quietly dropped her. The ones that remained demanded higher commissions, knowing she had few alternatives. Her social media presence, which David had carefully maintained, fell into disarray, inconsistent posts, poor quality photos, missed opportunities. She'd tried hiring a manager, but couldn't afford the kind of professional representation that might have helped, and the cheap alternatives were either incompetent or predatory. Her income had dropped by 60%. She'd moved into a small apartment across town. According to mutual acquaintances, she was still painting, still trying, but the momentum was gone. The career David had built for her was collapsing without the infrastructure he'd provided. David felt no satisfaction in this, just a kind of sad recognition that talent alone had never been enough. It had been the combination of her art and his support that had created success. Separated, both were diminished. But he also knew he couldn't fix it, wouldn't fix it. That wasn't his job anymore. In June, David completed his final project for the woodworking class, a dining table in cherry wood, seat 6, with a subtle inlay pattern he'd designed himself. It was beautiful, not perfect, but genuinely beautiful, marked by his own hands and his own vision. Vincent examined it carefully, running his fingers along the joints. "Fine work, David. Really fine. You thinking about continuing?" "I am," David said. "I've got ideas for a few more pieces." "Good." Vincent nodded approvingly. "You've got the touch for it, and more importantly, you've got the patience. That's rare." David hosted a dinner party at his house in July, the first time he'd entertained since the divorce. Nicole came, along with several colleagues from work and 2 friends from the woodworking class. They gathered around the table David had built, sharing food and stories. And David realized he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Contentment. Not the anxious satisfaction of completing a task for someone else, but the quiet pleasure of being exactly where he was, with people who valued him for himself. After everyone left, Nicole stayed to help clean up. "That table is really something," she said, loading plates into the dishwasher. "You should be proud." "I am," David said, and realized he meant it in a way he never had when talking about Vanessa's career. This was his. He'd built it for himself, and it was enough. Nicole turned to face him, leaning against the counter. "You know what I like about you, David? You're solid. Not boring solid, but like foundational solid. Like you know who you are and you're comfortable there." David thought about this. A year ago, he wouldn't have known how to respond to that. He built his identity around being needed, around being useful to Vanessa. Without that, he'd feared there was nothing left. But there was something left. There had always been something there. He'd just forgotten how to see it. "I'm learning," he said honestly. "I'm still learning who I am when I'm not taking care of someone else." "Well," Nicole said, smiling, "I'm enjoying the discovery process." She kissed him goodnight at the door. And David stood on his porch afterward, looking at his house, his life, his choices, and felt genuinely grateful. Not for the pain of the past year, not for Vanessa's betrayal or the divorce or the loneliness he'd worked through, but for the space it had all created. The possibility, the chance to build something real. David's phone rang on a Thursday morning in late September, nearly 18 months after the divorce was finalized. Unknown number, local area code. He almost didn't answer. "David Morrison?" The voice was unfamiliar, professional. "Speaking. This is Grace Wellington from the Riverside Gallery. I'm the new director. I was hoping we might talk about a potential collaboration." David's hand tightened on the phone. The Riverside Gallery, Preston Caldwell's gallery. The place where Vanessa's affair had started. "I'm an engineer, Miss Wellington. I don't think we have much to collaborate on." "Actually, that's exactly why I'm calling." Her voice was warm, unaware of the history. "We're renovating our space and expanding into the building next door. We need someone who understands both structural requirements and aesthetic vision. Your name came up repeatedly when I asked for recommendations. I looked into your work on the downtown development that public art integration is exactly the kind of thinking we need." David processed this. "What happened to Preston Caldwell?" A pause. "Mr. Caldwell is no longer with the gallery. Are you available to meet this week?" They met on Friday. Grace Wellington was in her mid-50s, sharply intelligent, with clear ideas about transforming the gallery into a community arts hub rather than just a commercial space. David listened to her vision and found himself interested despite his reservations. "I'll be honest," he said. "I have some personal history with this gallery that might be complicated. If it's about Vanessa Hartley, I'm aware. She approached me about representation when I took over. I declined." Grace's expression was neutral but firm. "Her work is technically proficient, but her professional reputation is problematic. Multiple gallery owners have mentioned difficulties with reliability and contract disputes. That's not someone I want to work with, regardless of talent." David nodded slowly. "And you're comfortable working with her ex-husband?" "Mr. Morrison, I care about competence, vision, and professionalism. Your reputation on all three counts is excellent. What happened in your personal life is entirely separate, unless you feel it would compromise your ability to do good work." "It wouldn't," David said, and realized he meant it. He took the project. The gallery renovation became one of the most satisfying jobs of his career, solving the puzzle of preserving the building's historical character while creating flexible, modern exhibition spaces. Grace was a demanding client, but a fair one, and they developed a strong working relationship. In November, David ran into Vanessa at a coffee shop downtown. He almost didn't recognize her at first. She'd cut her hair short, wore clothes that looked practical rather than fashionable. She was alone, working on a laptop at a corner table. Their eyes met. For a moment, neither spoke. "David," she said finally. "Vanessa." An awkward pause. Then Vanessa closed her laptop. "Do you have a minute?" He should have said no, should have made an excuse and left. But something in her face, a lack of the old defensiveness, made him curious. They sat at her table. She ordered them both coffee, a small gesture that felt significant somehow. "I heard you're working on the Riverside renovation," Vanessa said. That must be strange. It's just work." "Right." She looked down at her hands. "I'm not doing well, David. I'm sure you've heard." He didn't deny it. "I wanted to blame you," she continued. "For months, I told myself you'd sabotaged my career out of spite, that you'd turned galleries against me, poisoned my reputation." She looked up, meeting his eyes. "But that wasn't true, was it? You just stopped doing all the things I never acknowledged you were doing, and without that foundation, everything collapsed." David sipped his coffee, waiting. "I'm working as a barista now," Vanessa said. 3 days a week. I still paint, but I had to get a real job because I couldn't manage the business side alone. I tried hiring people, but I couldn't afford anyone competent. And I couldn't tell the difference between someone who knew what they were doing and someone who was just taking my money. "I'm sorry it's been difficult," David said, and meant it. "Are you?" Vanessa's smile was bitter. "I told you you'd never survive without me. Turns out I was exactly backward, wasn't I? You're thriving. New job. From what I hear, you're dating someone. You look content. While I'm barely holding on. You're talented, Vanessa. You always were. But talent isn't enough by itself. It never was. I know that now." She traced the rim of her coffee cup. "I took you for granted. I took everything you did for granted because you made it look effortless. I thought the hard part was the art and everything else was just logistics, details, stuff anyone could handle." "It wasn't malicious," David said. "You just didn't see it." "I didn't want to see it," Vanessa corrected, "because seeing it would have meant acknowledging how much I needed you, and that felt like weakness. So I convinced myself the career was all mine, and you were just along for the ride." She paused. "I was wrong, and I'm sorry." David studied her. The apology felt genuine, born from actual understanding rather than manipulation. It didn't change anything, didn't heal the betrayal or restore what they'd had, but it was something. "What are you going to do?" he asked. "Keep painting. Keep working. Figure out how to manage my own career, even if it's smaller than it was." Vanessa shrugged. "Maybe take some business classes. Learn the things I should have learned years ago instead of letting you handle them." "That's good. That's smart." They talked for a few more minutes, carefully polite, before David excused himself. Walking back to his car, he felt an unexpected lightness. Not forgiveness exactly, but a kind of closure. Vanessa had finally seen what he'd contributed, had finally acknowledged the reality of what they built together and what had been lost. It didn't make him want her back, didn't make him regret the divorce. But it closed a circle, answered a question he hadn't quite known he was carrying. Had any of it mattered? Had she ever understood what he'd given? Now he knew. Yes, and yes. That evening, David had dinner with Nicole at his house. He'd made lasagna, a recipe he'd perfected over the past year, and she brought wine and stories about her students' latest lab disasters. "You're quiet tonight," Nicole observed over dessert. "Everything okay?" David told her about running into Vanessa, about the conversation. Nicole listened without interrupting, her face thoughtful. "How do you feel?" she asked when he finished. "Okay, actually, it was good to hear her acknowledge things. But mostly, it just confirmed what I already knew. That part of my life is over, and I'm glad." Nicole reached across the table and took his hand. "You know what I love about you? You're not bitter. You could be after everything, but you're not. You just moved forward." "I had help," David said, squeezing her hand. "And I had woodworking." She laughed. Never underestimate the therapeutic value of a good dovetail joint. Later, after Nicole left, David stood in his workshop, the spare bedroom he'd converted after Vanessa moved out, the space that had once been her studio. His current project was a jewelry box in bird's eye maple, a Christmas gift for his sister. The wood was challenging, the grain unpredictable, but he was learning to work with it rather than against it. He thought about Vanessa's studio, which had been designed to her exact specifications, optimized for her process, built to support her vision. He'd done that work gladly, believing he was building their future together. This workshop was different. He built it for himself, arranged it for his own comfort and efficiency. Every tool had been chosen because he wanted it. Every project undertaken because it interested him. It was smaller than Vanessa's studio had been, less impressive, but it was completely, authentically his. That made all the difference. David picked up a piece of sandpaper and returned to his work, feeling the grain of the wood under his fingers, listening to the soft whisper of wood dust falling to the floor. Outside, autumn rain began to fall, gentle and steady. He was alone in his workshop, in his house, in the life he'd built from the ruins of his marriage. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, alone felt like exactly enough. Not because he was isolated. He had Nicole, had friends, had family and colleagues, and a community that valued him. But because his foundation no longer depended on being needed. He'd learned to build for himself, to create for the satisfaction of creation rather than the validation of someone else's success. Vanessa had screamed that he'd never survive without her. She'd been wrong. But more importantly, David had learned she'd been asking the wrong question entirely. The question wasn't whether he could survive without her. The question was whether he could thrive as himself, building his own life with his own hands according to his own vision. Standing in his workshop, with rain pattering against the windows and maple shavings curling at his feet, David knew the answer. He could, he was, he would. And that was more than survival. That was freedom.